Okay, thank you very much. Before I start, I have deviated from the standard format, so you'll see some text and graphs. I know that they're not allowed, but we'll see how it will go. So I guess, ready? Go. So for the past, I would say, centuries, the European economies have dominated the global landscape. And here Queen Victoria symbolizes the rule of the UK in the 19th century. Then it shifted to the United States, where Roosevelt is probably one of the most famous presidents. Who will be ruling the world in the next century? Some of these guys that were sitting at the end. Just to give you some background, today the United States and Europe have output that is 40% of the world output. Now, it's very interesting to think about the future in terms of our basic understanding of the economies. The way that we think about the economy is that advanced economies, like the United States and Europe, have a technological frontier. Over time, the only way for them to grow is by pushing the technological frontier with new ideas, innovation, and so on. This growth is about 2–3% a year. A poor country is below the frontier, and because labor costs are low in countries like this, growth can be very rapid by reallocating capital, as we have seen. But the implication of this model is that at some point all countries around the world will reach the frontier and will have the same income per capita. If you think about the implications of this, if you have the same income per capita in the United States and India, then the population will determine the size of the economy. If you have 1 billion people, times let's say 50,000 per person, the economy will be $50 trillion. If you have 1 million people, then it will be only $50 billion. In this case, we'll see that China and India will be 40% of the world output, the United States will be less than 5%, Europe will be less than 5% of the world output. The world, if it happens, will be very different from anything that we had seen before. And I usually call this a seismic shift in economic power, a seismic shift that we have seen only between the United States and Europe, so from Europe to the US, and now we see such a seismic shift again. Is this just a hypothesis or is it supported by the data? When you look at the US, you realize that for the last 130 years, the United States has been developing, has been increasing its income, more or less according to this straight line. If you look at other countries, for example, Japan, starting very poor, 15% of the US level, for the next 30–40 years was growing as the theory predicts, converging to the US, and then growing at the same speed as the United States. So theory, in this case, was supported by facts. But if you look at the global economy, if you look at Africa, Asia, and so on, you realize that theory and facts not always match. Some countries do not converge, and we have seen poverty and so on. But as Albert Einstein says, if theory doesn't match the facts, then change the facts, because theory has to be right. So what do we miss from the facts? Let's look at two countries. Compare the United States to Niger. In 1988, in the United States, incomes were $31,000. In Niger, 35 times lower, $860. What explains this difference? Do people in Niger lack productivity, lack capital or labor? If we give to people in Niger capital, and there is something wrong with this slide, they'll produce only 50% more. If we give them American skills, American labor, working with American machines in Niger, they'll produce $4,000. The big difference between Niger and the United States is not because Niger doesn't have capital or skills, it is because of productivity that is driven by the business environment and the institutions in Niger. And here is one example how institutions have helped Singapore move from the same level as Venezuela to become a rich country as the United States. Venezuela, with poor quality institutions, has stagnated and remained at the same level as it was 40 years ago. When I talk about institutions, still people ask, but isn't it possible to grow, become a rich country, move to the right with poor quality institutions? Are they that important? And especially when you think about China, China doesn't have the same institutions that people in the West think that they're valuable. To figure out what's going on, we have here income per capita and institutional quality. poor quality institutions, good institutions, poor countries, rich countries. What is amazing about this chart, this is data, is that there is no one here. There is not a single poor country that has good quality institutions. The more important thing is that as these countries grow, there is a wall at about $10,000, $12,000, where if they don't transform their institutions, they will stagnate, they'll hit the wall, and they will stop growing. So to me, when we talk about, because it's called global leadership, my session, there are two important things. The first one is how the global leaders will manage this transition of economic authority between the West and the East. And they might be changing ideology, they might be changing military and political power. And the second question, which is probably more pertinent to the discussions here, is how countries like China and India have the power to transform their institutions so that growth in these countries indeed drives them into the upper quadrant.
Thank you very much, Ilian.